Okay, Rav Mendel is those of you that don't know, Rav Mendel is the Rav of Tfilat Yamin, and we're delighted to have you to talk about life beyond Earth and what the Torah says about it. You've got 30 minutes.
And actually, by the way, it's good at the time because I usually go short, so this is great. Okay, so just before we start, the introduction to this year is that I'll tell you myself, when I thought we were going to speak about life beyond Earth, the first thing I thought is that people are going to start thinking I've gone a little bit loony. When I say life beyond Earth, I'm talking about whatever you want to call it, aliens, extraterrestrials. What about life that is beyond our planet? Okay? The reason why I personally became fascinated by this idea is because I'm sure most of you have heard about Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is a guy who plans that the Earth is going to deteriorate, and then one day global warming, whatever it is, etc., we have to move to a different planet. And he's been researching and saying and this and that. I remember hearing him saying one time, there absolutely must be aliens, 100%. So I thought to myself, until now, if somebody believes in aliens, they must be crazy. But then I said to myself, if Elon Musk, who seems to be quite an intelligent man, believes that there's aliens, there must be some sort of a basis to it. So I thought to myself, then the next step would be, what does the Torah think about it? But before we go into what Torah thinks about it, just on the practical, secular, whatever you want to call it, mundane world knowledge level of what does the world have to say about aliens. So one of the earliest sources that you have in the world looking to a terrestrial being is there is a 15th century painting where it's depicting, it's called Madonna with Saint Giovanni. And in the back of the painting, you see it depicts a woman. And in the back of the painting, there's a guy standing there with his dog, and he's playing frisbee with the dog. And in the back behind them, there's this flying saucer type image in the sky painted into this 15th century painting. And then if you look throughout early history, you see the Sanskrit scrolls, and even some people point to the book of Yechezkel, even though the pasuk that they point to, I'm not even going to quote because it doesn't make any sense. They misinterpret it on a secular level, but they point to many different levels of ancient sources for there being aliens. Okay? So that's ancient sources. Statistical data. In 1961, there was an astronomer, his name was Frank Drake. He sat down and he actually made a calculation, an algorithm is what we would call it today, which most of websites and social media, everything runs on algorithms. He made an algorithm to say to himself, to answer this question, how many planets in the galaxy, in the world, in the universe, could there be that there could be life on? And he made this whole algorithm and it was agreed upon with NASA, all these different organizations. He came to the conclusion that there is probably hundreds of thousands of planets in the entire universe that could have life on them. The problem is that we are quite far away. That's why right now, Elon Musk and these guys who are working on this SpaceX are trying to move to Mars, which is not a great place. It's not Ur Yamim. There's no beach on Mars. The air there is not great. So we're looking for a better planet. Hopefully we'll have a nicer place to get a second home on a different planet soon, and Mars won't be the last one. But that was Frank Drake. Then throughout history, which is probably where things get a little bit loony and people say, okay, I do believe it, I don't believe it. And generally speaking, to be honest with you, I think aliens are the type of thing that makes people uncomfortable in their skin. To think that there's another species that's in the space and they have flying saucers and this and that makes people a little bit queasy, right? To think about, oh, there's another race like this flying around. So people don't like to think about it. But generally what has brought extraterrestrial life to the forefront has been the unsolved sightings. And many times people will come out and they'll say, oh, I was abducted by an alien. I went up into a spaceship and they performed a surgery on me and this and that. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a few times throughout history, modern history, where there have been very credible sightings of large groups of people. An example, in 1853, the University of Tennessee, there was an entire class that was outside and they were conducting a class looking at the stars. This entire class swears that they saw a UFO, aliens, 100%, and all of them have the same story. More recently, in 2004, this is probably the most famous modern case that we have today. In 2004, there was a sighting in Stephenville, Texas. A bunch of guys, this little town in Texas, which I think is famous for being a milk town until this happened, where these guys were out in the fields and they were farming, whatever, and all of a sudden, one guy on the other side of town by himself says he sees this flying object with bright flashing orange lights. Then, all of a sudden, all over town, these stories start popping up, and everyone starts saying, because it's these little towns, they start saying, well, the government is covering something up. We have to fight the government. They're doing this. And sure enough, they pressed the government because what happened is that this flying object had F-16 fighter jets flying after it. So they said the government knows about it because they're sending these jets after it. The government said, no, there was no jets flying on that night. But sure enough, somebody in the area had a radar. They had a documented, verified radar system, and they saw 2 F-16 fighter jets flying after a certain unidentified object that I don't understand all the technical terms for it, but there's some sort of an object that was not giving off regular signals. And they see this whole flying pattern, and it's all corroborated by the system. So when the government saw that and they released that information, then the government said, yes, oh, we forgot that night there was a training session where we were sending around F-16 fighter jets. Now this whole idea of the government covering it up, this goes much, much deeper than that. Astronauts, which I think you could say are the main people, if you want to ask, is there anything in space? Probably the guy to ask is astronauts. And I think recently they sent a famous actor, I forgot what his name is. He went to space, but a bunch of astronauts have claimed that they have seen UFOs to the extent that Buzz Aldrin, when he was on Apollo 11, he was flying into space and he thought that the back, again, I don't know all the scientific terms for this, but the back of the ship breaks off when the ship goes into space, right? It's part of the flying process. So he saw this thing flying alongside the ship and he said to the, whatever it is, the base, he said, okay, oh, that's the piece or whatever. And they told him the piece is like 6,000 miles away. And it was this other thing flying alongside them. And he just remembers this, and it didn't do anything. There was no lights, nothing, just this object flying next to their ship, okay? And again, before we move into the Torah, I want to really drive in this, get a little crazy over here. It's getting late at night, so we can get a little fun. Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States of America, has famously described his own encounter with a UFO. Bill Clinton has famously said that the US government is absolutely covering up alien encounters, and they know about alien encounters, and they're not telling us. He even speaks about, Bill Clinton goes to speak about Independence Day scenarios. The Obamas have spoken about it. This is something people on that level of credibility and brains, like a US president, meaning Bill Clinton might not be the most credible guy, but the US presidents of saying that they have seen this alien UFO idea. And really, when this entire idea totally exploded was in July of 2023, where they had hearings in the Congress, in the US Congress, and they had 3 people testify before Congress under oath that these 3 men, I have 2 of their names. 2 of their names are David Fravor and David Grush, where they both said that they are absolutely testifying that the United States of America is covering up known sightings of UFOs, known having UFO material. Even one of them, David Grush, even said that they have recovered, and he described it as biological material, which means a physical alien, whatever you want to call it, body. They have recovered that in a crash landing site before, and the US government every single time covers it up. Now, when it gets really, really bizarre, and it's very exciting because that's the country that we're in, is when we come to Israel. In Israel, there's a man named Chaim Eshed. Chaim Eshed is considered still today, and as always has been, the godfather of Israel's space capabilities. He is the founder, director, he's the genius behind Israel's space capabilities. He came out recently and he said something very outlandish, to the point that I would say it's possible to assume that maybe, he's not thinking as clearly as he used to be. But he came out and said that there is an intergalactic relationship between the world and the aliens, and that all the governments have been signed to an agreement where they keep it undercover because people, citizens of the world, will not be able to handle it. And he even said that Trump was going to blab about it, but then they had to keep him quiet. So this, obviously, when Chaim Eshed came out and said this, everyone said, okay, Chaim Eshed has completely fallen off his rocker, right? That's pretty intergalactic, watching too many movies, getting too excited, who knows? But sure enough, Isaac Ben Israel, who today is the chairman of the Israel, the equivalent of NASA, he came out and said that you should know, yes, I do not agree with Chaim. I think that what Chaim said is not true. I think it's outlandish, and I think it's a little bit too far. But he said most dignified, reputable scientists today that study space will tell you that they believe there is aliens, there is extraterrestrial life. So after I read all of that information, I said to myself, okay, so now that we have all of this information, we need to figure out what does the Torah have to say about it. And why is that? Is because those who believe that they're aliens, or if you've ever seen any movies that they're aliens, aliens is a really, it's a childish word. That's the word it's easiest to say. It seems to be that aliens are always super intelligent. It's never that we're the dominant species and they always seem to be much more powerful, much bigger, much more advanced, and we are the less dominant species. That would be logically speaking, because if they discovered us, if they got to us first, that means that our capabilities are less than them, because that means they're able to travel around Earth space much better than we can, which would seem to mean that either they're older than us, they've been around longer than us, or they're smarter than us. So then that would seem to say that the human race is the second race, and there's some other race out there which is the more dominant race. So the question is, what does the Torah have to say about that? What if there's this more dominant race? Then maybe the Jewish people are not the chosen people. Maybe we're just the best that's on earth. But if there's another species that comes along, little green men, then we'd say, okay, that was the better guys. Okay, the Jews, okay, fine, now you're second class. So what does the Torah have to say about this? So first of all, what does the Torah have to say about the existence of aliens? So Maimonides and many other Torah commentators have said that there's absolutely celestial beings that have consciousness. Now the question is, when you say celestial beings, are you talking about angels? Are you talking about malachim? Or are you talking about aliens, right? So it's funny, meaning it's always funny that this seems to happen, but the main modern day Rav or Rabbi, whatever you want to call it, that is quite famous, that has given a clear answer and commentary on this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Mendel of blessed memory. He says, if you look in the book of Judges, you will see that there is an encounter which is extremely fascinating. Devorah, the prophetess, sings a song after there's a battle between Barak and Sisera. After this battle happens, she sings a song, and in her song she says, "Cursed be Meroz." Meroz needs to be cursed. Who is Meroz? Meroz, the Talmud comes along and tells us that Meroz is either one of two places. The second place we're not going to talk about. The first place is what interests us. The Talmud says that Meroz is a star or a planet, which would mean that when you say Meroz, the inhabitants of Meroz, that there is these people that are living on the planet or star of Meroz that did not come and help the Jewish people in this battle. Excuse me. And therefore, Deborah was cursing them. She was saying, you didn't come to join us in our battle, now you are cursed. But these people were people in intergalactic, whatever you want to call it, species. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, when you look at that source in the book of Judges, it would be foolish, it would be childish just from looking at this world and say that there's no other living thing. Look at what the Talmud says, look at what the book of Shoftim says. Seems to tell you there's something living out there. In addition to that, there's a very famous literal rocket scientist. His name is Dr. Velvel Green. He actually became a full Baal Teshuvah. He's a fascinating man. If you ever want to read about a really fascinating life, his name is Velvel Green. He grew up completely secular, not observant. And then after becoming a full-on, full-blown, famous astrodynamic scientist, whatever you want to call it, he became a Baal Teshuvah. And he asked the Rebbe, because NASA put him in charge of looking for life in space, on Mars specifically. So he asked the Rebbe, is it against the Torah for me to be looking for aliens? Because maybe, exactly like we said, maybe there's another dominant species that the Torah doesn't agree with. Maybe as a halachic Jew, I can look for aliens. So the Rebbe told him, not only should you look for aliens, but that it would be almost apikursos, which means it would be, how do you translate apikursos? It would be, what? It would be, what is it, heresy? Heresy. It would be heresy to say that God is limited, that he can only create one world that has living beings. You would be limiting God's creation. The whole idea of God is unlimited. He can make who knows how many galaxies, how many billions and trillions miles away. For us, our brains can only handle a certain amount of information in one place. But to say that God could not create more species than other planets, you're limiting God's creation. Okay? Wait a second. And in addition, by the way, this whole thing of Barak and Sisera is actually corroborated as well by the Shalach, who was a Gaon of Vilna, not the Vilna Gaon, he was a Gaon from Vilna, and he also brings the same proof that he says that there is life on other planets based on this story that we have in the book of Shoftim. Rabbi Norman Lamb writes an article about this, and he writes a fascinating article because his is more philosophical. He's not as much bringing proofs, but he's actually asking the question, which really is brilliant if you see the way he writes it, because he's not even saying, look at the sources. He's saying, take the general idea of what the Torah tells you and ask the question, would it be okay to find an alien and would that be allowed? And the reason why I found that to be very fascinating is because really the point of this class is not just that we sit here and say, is there aliens, they're not aliens, do we care, do we not care, what if there is, who cares? The point is to show what is, first of all, what are the essential ideas of Judaism that make us unique? That is really the most important question, which I think it's great that I went after Rav Weunsch, because it's the same question with AI. is what is the essential aspects of a Jewish person that makes us unique, even to not just a robot, to another species coming from out of space that has much more technological capabilities than us, way beyond Facebook or Skype or any of Zoom or anything like that. So he brings an answer like this. There's a question. Why was the world created? Right? It says God was alone, he created the world. So the question is, why would God want to create the world? So number one, the answer is, why was the world created? For desire. It says God had a desire to create the world. Like, for example, you could say, as a parent, naturally we have an instinct to have a child, right? And we bring that child into our life, even though it could be that we were living a fine life before there was a child, and yet we make a space to bring something into our life which makes us extremely vulnerable. Because we all know one of the greatest pains a person can go through is losing a child. So you create that space, and now you need it. So it's the same with God. Are we saying God created the world because he desires the world, or because he needs the world? So one answer is that he desires it, or the other answer is that he needs it. Now, if he desires it or needs it, who's to say he doesn't desire or need another one? So that's a simple philosophical question that seems to say that there would be other lives. Why would you say that if God has a desire, he only has one desire to create one world and one nation? Maybe he has a desire to create another world, another nation. The second question that he brings, according to the answer that says the world was created by desire, it is clear that desire does not come from a place of stinginess. Desire comes from a place of giving, right? If a father wants to give, he's in the mood of giving, he gives a lot. He doesn't just give one thing, he gives a lot. So he's saying if God is in the zone of desire of giving and he's in a good mood, then why would he only create one people? Okay? Against this, which to be honest with you, I don't fully understand this because I have a lot of questions on this, saying against why there would be aliens, is he says that God is one. And when you say God is one, you mean God is a pure one. He is not multiple of one. He is the purest form of one that there could be in the entire universe of existence. If that's the case, then seemingly you would say a pure one only creates a pure one. He would not create many different nations that he would call his children. He would only create one because he is one, so therefore he would create one. Now, the problem I have with that assertion, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, which is what I'm assuming, is that obviously in the world there is many different species. Even if we're the chosen people, there's many different species, many different nations, many different nationalities, many different languages. God seems to, with his oneness, like to create many, many. There's billions and trillions of organisms in the world that we don't even know yet. And that is the idea that God has created. So I don't see necessarily that answer. But what he concludes, Rabbi Lamb concludes, is that it seems to be that not only should we not say there is no aliens, that it would be heresy to say that, what? Heresy? Heresy. It would be heresy to say that there is not aliens. Why? He brings another proof. There's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that speaks about how God at night travels on his chariot between 18,000 worlds. That's what it says in the Gemara. That God goes on his chariot and he goes between 18,000 worlds. Now, I'm sure if you're familiar with the Talmud at all, you've probably seen that there is much Agadata. There's many crazy stories of rabbis landing on islands that turn over. And there's a story of a bird standing in the water, and the bird's legs are so long that they touch the bottom of the ocean. But if you threw a hammer in the ocean, it still was falling for 70 years. That's what it says in Bava Basra. So many times the Gemara says very outlandish stories. But over here, the Gemara says clearly that God at night goes between 18,000 worlds. That's the second source straight from the Torah. So over here, if we're counting straight Torah sources, you have the book of Shoftim that speaks about the war of Barak and Sisera and the prophet of Devorah. You have in the Gemara of Avodah Zarah where it speaks about the 18,000 worlds. The last source I have for you tonight to end off before we move into Rabbi Dr. Liberman is in the book of, which is brought by the Shalom, where he says like this. In the book of Isaiah, in chapter 45, verse 18, for thus said Hashem, creator of the heavens, he is the God, the one who fashioned the earth, and he is its maker. He established it. He did not create it for emptiness. He fashioned it to be inhabited. Which means what? It seems to imply from there that if God creates a world, he doesn't create it randomly, right? God doesn't make a couch, bring a couch into his house for nobody to sit on the couch. If God makes a world, he wants it to be inhabited. He wants there to be life. So he takes from that verse, the Shalah, Pinchas Elijah ben Maimer Horowitz brings from that verse that God would not have created so many hundreds of thousands of, I don't even know how many millions of universes and worlds all over the galaxies if he would not have them to be inhabited. Yes, you could say there's other worlds in our Milky Way that do not have life on them, But all these planets out there, it must be that there is life on them because God would not have created them for nothing. God doesn't just like to bring in furniture for no reason. All the planets must have been created for a reason. So what do we conclude from all of this? To take out one conclusion, one simple line. Does it seem that the Torah says that there is aliens? Yes, it seems to be. It seems to be that the Torah would say that there is aliens. Does it matter if there is aliens? Even if they are a more intelligent race? No, it does not matter. Why does it not matter? Is because the Torah's main focus is bchira chafshe, which means free will. The Torah wants a people and a nation that have free will to choose between good and evil, and that is what the Torah is the most fascinated by. Believe it or not, the Torah is not fascinated by the tzaddikim, the prophets, and the great people of the Jewish people throughout history. The Torah is not as fascinated by them as the Torah is with you, with the average Joe in the 21st century in America that has Netflix and an iPad and they're living in Israel on the beach. The Torah is fascinated with us the most. Why? Because of our flaws, because of the fact that we do not know clearly, even when we have morals, we do not know clearly the difference between good and evil, and that struggle between the two, that is what the Torah is fascinated by. So therefore, if there would be another species, and they did not have the Torah, which we must say they do not have the Torah because the Torah is only one, and the Torah is clear, was given on this earth, then they do not have free will. And if they do not have free will and they do not have the Torah, then it wouldn't matter if they were more intelligent. It wouldn't matter if their cars were nicer than us or their houses were nicer than us, or whatever it would be. The Torah cares about the simple Jew living here in the 21st century, no matter what. Thank you very much.